Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Hope everyone is doing okay today. It's 11:44. Let's see. I'm going to have right many shows today. This one is going to be relatively short. It wasn't one I had planned on doing, but I saw it this morning, and after listening to it, I definitely want to do it. Mehdi Hassan is a reporter. He now works for The Intercept. You know him if you see him. But he's been doing some really good work. There's been a few pieces that I disagree with him on, but he's been doing, for all intents and purposes, good work. He's a journalist, reporter. And The Intercept has been doing a bang-up job also. Well, for The Intercept, he was able to get Ben Rhodes. Ben Rhodes was Obama's foreign policy speechwriter and later became his deputy national security advisor. He's hawking a book. And hawking the book, he's known in this odd way as being the brain of Obama, because oftentimes when he talks about stuff, he talks about it from the perspective of, in many respects, his boss, Obama. Ben Rhodes gets him on the couch and asks him all sorts of interesting and difficult questions. But more interesting, he asks them from the left, if that makes sense. Not, for example, if I say, why didn't you put more forces in Syria to take down Bashar al-Assad? Well, that's an attack from the right. As opposed to, why were you intervening in Syria to the degree that you were intervening in Syria? That's an attack from the left. That's what I mean. The questions that he's posing is to some degree from the left, and which is why I find this interview so interesting. One section of the interview that I want to play is when they're having a conversation about arming terrorists, meaning ISIS getting their hands on American weapons, Americans and Saudi Arabia weapons. The mainstream media doesn't really touch this, but this kind of goes to this thing of what I say mainstream media lies to the public. It chooses what to show versus what to omit. It is a big deal if you're doing anything about terrorism, if you're talking anything about what's taking place in Syria, that you include that we have spent millions in that country. And our weapons have flushed all through that country because we were less careful in regards to how we were arming people in that country. We wanted Assad out of that seat, and that was the most important thing. And the same clusterfuck that took place in Libya, we were willing to have a similar clusterfuck in Syria. Either this was complete and utter incompetence by the Obama administration, or they did it on purpose in order to take Bashar al-Assad out of his seat. I don't know which one is worse. I don't know which one is worse. Brzezinski had this idea similar to what's taking place now, where they would use radical Islam in order to attack Russia, essentially getting Russia bogged down in Afghanistan with this idea of using radical Islam to harden the troops and make them more of a military fighting force. Well, we are paying for the consequences of those choices. And just like Brzezinski coming up with this idea of radical Islam in order to attack the Soviet Union, we're living with the consequences, the blowback. This is somewhat of a similar scenario. Obama decides he wants to be master of the universe. And in being master of the universe, he wants to take another leader out of their seat, meaning he wants to have regime change. That's what he wants to do. That's an amazing thing that the United States president decides, I want that guy out of the seat. Other presidents have done it. Yes, doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it right. Just because they normalize the behavior, it doesn't make it right. Nor does it make it right for the populations that are suffering under the decisions that are made in that office. Meaning, when Obama made the decision to do that, well, how do you do that? Well, maybe one of those ways is supporting opposition groups in the country. What happens when the opposition groups gets their weapons taken from them? What happens when those opposition groups aren't who they say they are? What happens? What happens? You flooded that area with millions of dollars, weapons, resources, and ISIS essentially was able to get their hands on those military resources, making their capabilities that much more. That war has raged on for what, 6 years? And if the United States didn't take a part in that war, meaning funding the terrorists, giving money to rapists and head choppers, that war will be over with by now. As we speak, right now, we are in Syria trying to stop the Syrian government from taking land that belongs to them, protecting the terrorists at the exact same time. If you're wondering whether Obama should answer for this, yes, Obama should answer for these poor decisions. Hassan asks Ben Rhodes. Let's hear what Ben Rhodes has to say about this. I love this. So this is on The Intercept. The article is at the bottom for yourself if you want to see the entire interview. I may do another section of this just because it's a really good interview. So, and like I say, he's hawking a book. And personally, I think he's an apologist, but I'll let you hear it for yourself.
Hillary Clinton famously criticized you and your boss for not having a grand organizing principle for foreign policy. She said, quote, "Don't do stupid shit is not an organizing principle." Now, personally, I happen to be with you and your boss on this. I happen to think don't do stupid shit is a pretty good rule of thumb for US foreign policy. So given that, let's talk about what you think the stupidest shit was that your administration did. Was it Libya, which Obama publicly called his worst mistake and privately called a shit show? Or was it Syria, as you seem to suggest in your book, and in an extract from your book that got a lot of attention in the Atlantic magazine recently?
Well, actually, you know, first of all, I think it is a good rule of thumb, and it's not the be-all, end-all. I think that's the foundation, right, that you start from, and then you try to, on top of that, you have Iran, Cuba, Paris, where we're doing things affirmatively. It's interesting, Mehdi, when I look back on it, it's something you and I used to talk about. I wish we had done more to, frankly, bring to an end the war in Afghanistan. And obviously some of the associated counterterrorism efforts.
It's a very good point.
Put it this way, the broad direction of the United States being in a kind of an open-ended, permanent state of war, I wish we had done more to change that. Now, obviously in Iraq and Syria, you know, ISIS did demand a military action, but in Afghanistan, you know, we're 15 years in. I don't think people can articulate why we're still there. People can warn about all kinds of scenarios if we leave, but all of those scenarios are taking place with us there. And I think it raises the question of whether or not America is getting ourselves into wars without, you know, any clear idea of what we're trying to achieve or how they will end.
But Ben, wouldn't it have helped? And you know, the people.
Did he tell his boss that? Did he tell his boss that? You could have made that argument the day that they took office. Literally, the day that they took office. This comes across as, hey, I lost my job. I need to pay this bill. Let's let him finish. I don't want to intrude on that. But that argument, hey, maybe we're getting into wars that we don't need to get into. Mind you, the same guy, he was beside the side of the guy who ended up in 7 additional wars, or 7 additional conflicts all across the globe. And now he's coming to this analysis of, maybe we got into too many wars. Maybe we could have, you know, not bombed those countries.
People talk about your mind meld with Obama. When you speak, you're often reflecting some of Obama's views. And you know, I encourage people to read the book if they want to get it inside of Obama, not just your views, before Obama's own memoir comes out. But what I don't get is, I hear you saying this, and I'm nodding in agreement. And I used to nod when I used to see you be interviewed in the White House. Wouldn't it have helped to end this open-ended military posture of the US if Obama had not filled his administration with card-carrying hawks from the get-go? Hillary Clinton, Rahm Emanuel, Leon Panetta, Susan Rice. The list goes on. All very bright people, but all people who quite like the idea of America being involved in lots of conflicts.
Well, you know, I do describe in the book the Afghan review in 2009, I think was a more important event than, you know, people probably think now, in that, you know, that was a pretty extraordinary process where essentially they came to him with one option to surge in an open-ended way 40,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan with no timeline to get them to bring them down. And despite months of meetings, you know, I detail whatever Obama did to try to refine the objectives, the recommendation was the same. And what he ended up doing was imposing a timeline on the surge. But in fact, you know, just the fact of the surge itself would make it very hard for us to, by the end of the administration, fully extricate ourselves from Afghanistan. And I do think that there was a mindset that drove that process that was out of step with what President Obama was looking for. And the interesting thing is that going forward, he was much more vigilant in working to try to constrain that type of open-ended escalation, and second-guessing on Syria tends to be actually not what you expressed, Mehdi, but the notion of we should have taken military action.
Yes.
What I do in the book is I try to look back at 2011. Was there a diplomatic window that we missed, or that we?
Did you hear what he said? He said all of the communications. Let's see. My signal was getting weird. Mostly, like the back and forth, had to do with intervening in Syria. There were no real voices in the room on whether or not they should not intervene in Syria. Think about how weird that is. All of the conversations that are taking place, all of the meetings, all of the talks boil down to what are we going to do in Syria? None of them boil down to should we do anything at all in Syria? Like all of the criticisms came from the direction of the right. That's amazing. That's amazing. Let's keep going.
In some ways, escalated its closure by pivoting to the call for Assad to go, which obviously I believe should happen. I believe Assad has been a terrible leader for Syria and has brutalized his people. But, was there a diplomatic initiative that could have been taken to try to avert or at least minimize the extent of the civil war? Because, what ended up happening essentially there is, we were probably too optimistic that after Mubarak went and Ben Ali and eventually Saleh and Gaddafi, that you would have a situation where Assad would go.
Listen to what he's saying. I'm going to replay this so you can hear the entire thing. But Obama wasn't for Mubarak leaving. I mean, this is aggravating listening to him. Obama wasn't for Mubarak leaving. This Arab Spring and everything else that came up with, behind the scenes, he preferred Mubarak because that was to stabilize Egypt. He wasn't on the side of the uprising at that point. And if you remember, the military ends up taking power once again. It wasn't Mubarak, but it was somebody who was close to him. Libya was a clusterfuck. Obama himself called Libya a clusterfuck. And now he's saying, well, we thought with Mubarak leaving and Gaddafi leaving that Bashar al-Assad will leave. We were too optimistic. What was the condition in Libya when Gaddafi left? Was that something that you really wanted to replicate? This is amazing. This is just an amazing conversation. No voice in the room on, hey, maybe we shouldn't do anything at all because it's not our country. We're not under attack. That's the first point. The second point, we're giving weapons to terrorists, and so we were overly optimistic that we could get Assad out that seat. None of this conversation is about the human toll that was taken based on the weapons that you were given and dropping into that country. Find this to be an amazing conversation. I'm going to restart this so you can hear the entirety of the question. I'm sorry, this was aggravating me to no end. There were a lot of people that died and lost their lives in that war. And for years and years and years on end, as that thing rolled on, we gave weapons and materials to the people in that region, allowing that war to keep ticking along, grinding one person after the next, grinding them down, having them living under terrorist occupation. What happens to the Christians under those Muslim occupations? Well, not the regular Muslims. I'm talking about the radical Islamic jihadists, the head choppers. Let's go back. Just the cavalier way in which he's talking about this. I'm aggravated about it. I'm sorry.
All the second guessing on Syria tends to be actually not what you expressed, Mehdi, but the notion of we should have taken military action.
Yes.
What I do in the book is I try to look back at 2011, 2012. Was there a diplomatic window that we missed, or that we, in some ways, escalated its closure by pivoting to the call for Assad to go, which obviously I believe should happen. I believe Assad has been a terrible leader for Syria and has brutalized his people. But, was there a diplomatic initiative that could have been taken to try to avert or at least minimize the extent of the civil war? Because, what ended up happening essentially there is, we were probably too optimistic that, after Mubarak went and Ben Ali and eventually Saleh and Gaddafi, that you would have a situation where Assad would go. And, not factoring in enough the the assistance he was going to get from Russia and Iran, combined with his own nihilism, and how that could lead him to survive. So I do look back at that potentially missed diplomatic opportunity. On the support to the opposition, I don't know that I would give us that much agency. There are a lot of people putting arms into Syria. Funding all sorts of
but
groups.
you were coordinating a lot of that arms. The US was heavily involved in that war with the Saudis and the Qataris and the Turks.
Well, I was going to say Turkey, Qatar, Saudi. I mean,
you were in there as well.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is that once it devolved into kind of a sectarian-based civil war with different sides fighting for their perceived survival, I think the ability to bring that type of situation to a close, and part of what I wrestle with in the book is the limits of our ability to pull a lever and make killing like that stop once it's underway. So that's why I still look to that initial open window. I also describe there was a slight absurdity in the fact that we were debating options to provide military support to the opposition at the same time that we were deciding to designate al-Nusra, a big chunk of that opposition, as a terrorist organization. So there was kind of a schizophrenia that's inherent in a lot of U.S. foreign policy that came to a head in Syria.
That's a very good word, especially to describe Syria policy. We're almost out of time. I do want to ask you this. You mentioned earlier, if we'd known Trump was coming next, we maybe would have modified our policy on Saudi or on Yemen or whatever. And I think that would apply to a lot of areas if you'd known Trump was coming next.
All the second guessing on Syria tends to be actually not what you expressed, Mehdi, but the notion of
Just so we're clear, the United States and Saudi Arabia arms significantly enhance ISIL's military capabilities, report reveals. The number of U.S. and Saudi supplied weapons in ISIS hands goes far beyond those that would have been available through battle capture alone. Compare that to what Ben Rhodes is saying, the apologist for the Obama administration. I gave U.S. trucks and ammunition to al-Qaeda, the chaotic U.S. effort to arm Syrian rebels. This guy just gave over his truck. The CIA had dropped millions of dollars and resources into those countries, into the opposition. And in many of those cases, it was terrorists who got their hands on those weapons. We shouldn't have been involved in the first place. That's my point. We should not have been giving money and weapons. And those money and weapons ended up in the hands of terrorist groups. We are there now. We shouldn't be there now. That government is aligned with Russia and Iran. If we shoot down a Russian jet, if we kill a lot of Russian forces in this big, splashy way, I'm just saying you can see how it will escalate into something that's more of a fuckfest. We are in a country illegally, holding on to the land in that country illegally, and that started with Mr. Obama. He's making this argument that the United States was only partially, tepidly involved in giving weapons. Millions and millions of dollars. And again, either trust the apologists or trust the journalists who actually did the investigations. I'll put both of these at the bottom so you can see it for yourself, in addition to the article from Ben Rhodes. So, let's see. Another Rhodes scholar trying to explain away the horrific past president's actions. You need empathy for when the consequences haven't hit you yet. Yeah. I don't. It's grading me the wrong way, because I look at this from the standpoint of the human beings at the bottom of those decisions. Obama decides, hey, I'm the U.S. president, and as the U.S. president, I get certain benefits of this job, and one of those benefits is to be master of the universe. I can make decisions about intruding into other people's countries and other people's governments. Do you understand the hysteria and the weirdness of this? We're openly saying we're supporting terrorists in another country as it tries to take down a country. Rhodes is trying to explain away the U.S. role in this. That war might have came to a halt in 1 year, maybe 2 years. But it wouldn't be ticking along with this meat grinder killing one person after the next if we weren't involved with supporting opposition forces. You don't give yourself enough credit then. You don't give yourself enough credit at all. You guys need to take a hell of a lot more credit for the number of lives that were lost in that conflict. We should have had nothing to do with it. It didn't involve us. And yet, we're giving weapons to terrorists. Do you know when Ronald Reagan got caught in the Iran missile, the Iran-Contra affair, it was a big deal. It was a very big deal. Oh my God, the United States president is selling weapons to Iran and using those weapons to take down the government, the Sandinista government. Oh my God. Reagan had to come out and explain himself to the American public and apologize to the American public, because the image of America was freedom and democracy. And the idea that this country that is screaming freedom and democracy everywhere it goes is literally trying to take down the country, you can understand that's somewhat bothersome. It breaks the image to some degree. And we've moved so far to the right in our media and in, I guess, cynical public, that this is not even major news. The media, all of the resources that CNN has at its disposal. When Tulsi Gabbard came out and said we are arming terrorists like 2 years ago, that was the reality of the situation. The media didn't want to touch it. And to some degree, they still don't. And this apologist, Ben Rhodes, gets up here and say, oh, let's tepid him out. Grudgingly, arm twisted, to admit that, yeah, we were funding terrorists in that part of the globe. And Donald Trump comes in office and just keeps it going. Or at one point, if I'm understanding it right, I heard Donald Trump, supposedly the reports are that he stopped doing it. But who knows? Who knows? Donald Trump is a habitual liar, so who knows? I don't like him. I mean, that's a complete apologist. Like, your decisions ended up getting a lot of people killed. It wasn't a decision that he made because he had to make it. He made it because he wanted to make it. He was an interventionist imperial president, and he wanted his role at it like the others. Well, that has consequences. You go from a dumpster fire of Syria, and even understanding it's a fuckfest in Syria, in Libya, you try to do the same thing in Syria. I don't know how that doesn't weigh on your conscience. When we get into this thing of should the effects or should the decisions that people make in government have a consequence on their person, that answer should be yes. Especially if what they're doing is killing thousands of human beings. So I'm going to end this here. This one went longer than I wanted, but I definitely want to show this. And I may show another part of the conversation where Media Hassan pushes him on, let me see, it was weapons. He pushed him on something else. Oh, Bush not prosecuting Bush after essentially admitting to torture and everything else, and how Gina Haspel is now head of the CIA. And to some degree, that is a fault of the Obama administration. If you would have prosecuted them, maybe they wouldn't have necessarily put those people ahead of these organizations. So I'm going to end this here. Yeah, this stuff is horrifying, openly making sociopathic, antisocial, anti-human activities. Soviet winter prison. It's odd. I mean, the media looks at this and gives it no mind. Your president was paying terrorists. The media pays that no mind. The media pays that no mind. That's a mind-blowing thing. He's sitting here admitting to it. It hurts him to. But even if he doesn't admit to it, like I said, other reporters in other parts of the world already know. You even got Fox News who's on the trail. That bloodhound of a lame dog. So I'll end this here. I will see you guys probably in about 10-15 minutes. And of course, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. Thanks, everyone.